Welcome to another real-world SF50 flying video. This one is titled, What's an Engine Cycle? And What's a Reference Duty Cycle? Hello, I'm David Weeks. I've been flying professionally for over 50 years, starting as a CFI, then as a charter pilot in light twins. I spent time as an air ambulance pilot in a Swearingen Metro and worked as a demonstration pilot for the Learjet factory. I had a 35-year airline career flying the 737-200 and 300, the A320 series, and I retired as a Boeing 787 captain. I'm also a current CFII. I've got over 675 hours in the SF50, and I'd like to share my SF50 experience with you. Now, there may be other YouTube channels that have glitzier production values than this one. I like to spend my time writing and teaching about the SF50, not doing post-production work. So just imagine this video is like a hangar chat session between friends. First, I do want to state clearly that the procedures in the Cirrus Vision Jet airplane flight manual are always controlling. This video is not flight instruction. Two important tidbits that I don't recall being covered in ground school or SOE, supervised operating experience, is the definition of an engine cycle and what is the reference duty cycle for the FJ33-5A. These two things relate to wear and tear on the engine. Wear and tear on turbine engines comes in large part when the engine is started and when it reaches maximum temperature and thrust on takeoff. High internal temperatures, be they measured as EGT, exhaust gas temperature, ITT, interstage turbine temperature, or TIT, turbine inlet temperature, over time cause wear and erosion of the hot section components. Also, the length of time at these high temperatures significantly affects engine hot section wear. For the FJ33-5A on the SF50, Williams uses ITT to measure the internal temperature of the hot section. This is the measure of the temperature between the low pressure and high pressure turbines. The FJ33-5A has 6 ITT probes that combine to produce a single ITT reading. Now, other than ingesting a 20-pound Canadian goose while at full power, the best and fastest way to destroy our engine is to over-temp it, and that usually happens on start. Bad batteries are the most common culprit. Also, excessive tailwinds don't help keep the start cool either, as it just slows the exhaust flow of the hot gases out the tailpipe. So remember to observe the 15-knot maximum tailwind and 25-knot maximum crosswind limits for engine start. It's easy to turn the airplane more into the wind by carefully pushing on a wingtip. Now, every SF50 pilot has memorized the maximum ITT start temperature for their engine, 836 degrees with short transients up to 1000. The max takeoff power ITT of 877 degrees for 10 seconds and 862 degrees for 5 minutes, as well as the max continuous ITT of 836 degrees. Now, if you look in the AFM at the 5-minute limit ITT of 862 degrees, you'll see a superscript 2 that points you to a footnote saying that 2 minutes at Toga is recommended for maximum engine life, and more about that later. Now, of course, if all these numbers have slipped your mind, you'll see exceedances on the ITT gauge. A red threshold line is displayed at the ITT steady state limit. The ITT pointer will turn from white to red, and the analog digits will turn white with a red background, which is continuously flashing if the ITT steady state limit is at an exceedance level. You'll also get a red ITT CAS message if you exceed a limit. So the engine gets hot at start time and on takeoff. So it stands to reason that the number of starts and takeoffs is directly related to engine wear. Now this introduces the concept of an engine cycle. A start, takeoff, landing, and shutdown. That's the normal engine operation for the vast majority of flights. Now here's how Williams defines a full FJ33-5A engine cycle from the maintenance manual. Quote, full cycle, engine start, takeoff power setting, followed by engine shutdown, regardless of the duration, shall be recorded as one flight cycle. Okay, that's pretty straightforward and applies to most flights. But there are a good number of flights and engine operations whose engine cycle count is not the ordinary one we just described. What about ground ops where you don't take off, or touch and goes, or what about go-rounds? Now, the Williams Maintenance Manual does go into more detail on these questions in what they call a partial cycle. Partial cycle. Each touch and go landing shall be recorded as 0.5 flight cycles. Each full stop landing without engine shutdown shall be recorded as 0.5 flight cycles. Okay, that's the definition. Now, how does this affect engine component life? This table shows the cycle limits for a lot of really expensive FJ3358 parts. We can see that many components are limited to 10,000 cycles, with some being limited to 5,000 and some to 12,000. Lastly, there's one more important requirement buried in the maintenance manual. Section 4.2 imposes operating limits for takeoff that relate to how long you operate at takeoff thrust and how that affects the cycle count. Here's what the book says. Quote, it is expected that the average flight profile will include a takeoff segment duration of 2 minutes as defined in the reference duty cycle. In the event that the time at takeoff for a given flight exceeds the 5-minute engine takeoff rating, 2 additional flight cycles must be recorded in the aircraft or engine logbook for each individual affected engine, in addition to those required per Section 2 flight cycle definitions. Quote, so if you're planning to run the engine at TOGA for more than 5 minutes, perhaps to help make a climb gradient requirement on a standard instrument departure, you'll need to add 2 cycles to however many cycles the flight otherwise created. Let's move on to counting cycles and start with ground operations. Say that you start up, taxi the fuel pumps, and shut down. Is that a cycle? No, as you did not go to takeoff power. Of course, you didn't set takeoff power just for fun to taxi, did you? Now, recall that takeoff power and the accompanying high ITT is one of the major factors for creating engine wear. But if you didn't go to TOGA on the ground, then no cycle was incurred. Now let's apply the Williams full and partial cycle definitions to a training flight that I did for a night and instrument approach currency flight a couple of months back. I started up, taxied to the fuel pump, and shut down. Okay, no cycle there. I started up again and took off. Yep, TOGA power. I did a full stop landing, but I did not shut down, and I taxied back. Now that invokes the second part of the partial cycle definition. Each full stop landing without engine shutdown shall be recorded as 0.5 flight cycles. And I did this one more time, so that adds another 0.5 cycles. Now my third approach ended with a full stop landing and a taxi back to the hangar where I shut down normally. So how many cycles did I get? The taxi to the fuel pump did not count, as I did not use TOGA power for taxiing. And looking at the first start and takeoff and the final landing and shutdown, that's the usual 1 full cycle. But in between, each of the 2 full stop landings without shutdowns added 0.5 cycles for a total of 1 cycle. So this entire training mission counts as 2 cycles. Now, if I had done 1 additional full stop and taxi back, the whole flight would have added 2.5 cycles. A non-whole number of cycles is perfectly okay in the Williams world. Now, what do you do if you do a missed approach or go-around? The partial cycle definition does not explicitly define how missed approaches are counted. You did go to takeoff thrust, but unlike the touch and go or full stop taxi back, the engine never came back to idle thrust. Now, I don't want to put words in Williams's corporate mouth, so I'm going to leave it to you, dear viewer, to figure out how to count cycles in the event of a go-around. But do remember that if all the time at takeoff thrust for the initial takeoff plus the time at takeoff thrust for the missed approach or go-around exceeds 5 minutes, you would need to add 2 additional cycles, as we discussed earlier. Now, in summary, when you send in your monthly TAC and Hobbs meter time and cycle count to Cirrus Jetstream every month, make sure that you count your engine cycles correctly. Taxiing around the airport does not count as a cycle. And make sure you correctly account for any full stop taxi back operations or touch and goes during currency flights. Next, let's talk about what Williams calls the reference duty cycle. This is the, quote, average flight, quote, for the SF50 engine. Here's the wording from the maintenance manual. The reference duty cycle represents the average flight profile, including the expected engine power setting and time for each phase of flight. The reference duty cycle is derived from the composition of all expected flights for this engine application. Because of the direct relationship between the reference duty cycle and the PSLs, it's required that the owner/operator monitor the flight profiles to which the engine is operated and contact Williams International immediately if the average operation deviates from the reference duty cycle shown in, then it quotes various figures in the manual. Now, the PSL is the published service life of a component, and those are also listed in the maintenance manual. The average flight has 15 minutes at ground idle, 2 minutes at toga power, then 37 minutes at max continuous thrust for climb and cruise. The cruise segment is followed by 17.5 minutes at some reduced power for descent and landing, then 5 minutes at ground idle again for the taxi in and shutdown. The whole profile takes 76.5 minutes. If your average flight is consistently shorter than the reference duty profile, you're supposed to contact Williams as you're getting more cycles per hour than they're averaged. The above wording would also seem to require that longer average flights also require informing Williams, but I would personally think that fewer cycles per hour creates less wear and tear on cycle limited components. Now, I hope this short discussion of cycles adds to your knowledge of the Williams FJ33-5A engine in the Vision Jet. I'm David Weeks, and thanks for watching this episode of Real World SF50 Flying.